All right, it's Tuesday. It's January 19th. A couple days ago this weekend, I finished Mort by Terry Pratchett, and I just wanted to talk about it. As I said I would do. Just trying to branch out, reading my books, different authors finally, besides just Sanderson. And I started with Terry Pratchett, Mort, Discworld. I was blown away by this little tiny book. At times I was reading it and I thought, I think Terry Pratchett might be a literal genius. This is a satire, for sure. It's about death, personified as kind of a human being, and it's a job that he works. And he takes on an apprentice, Mort, who becomes Death. It's the kid's name. He's like a nerdy loser, I guess. But, man, the amount of context and jokes and perspective and just observations on the world at large that Pratchett fit into these pages. I mean, it's 300 pages, or give or take, but they're not very big. It's unbelievable how much he crammed into this book. Every page was filled with something engaging was on basically every page. This is the first Discworld book I've ever read. The world of the disc, it's just a good basis for him to expound on ideas that he has, I think. I think it's so absurdist. It's a disc on the back of like a giant space turtle. That's the world. I think the whole thing is like so ridiculous that it allows him to just add in elements wherever he wants that will help magnify or paint the picture of some statement, observation, joke that he wants to make. He can just sort of throw stuff in there at will because it's so wonky, and it works. It works. I really love this book. I'm going to read more Terry Pratchett. It's a little exhausting. There's so much in it that it was exhausting for me to read. Meaning, like, I just started First Law, which is a more traditional story, and I can fly through it. This hurts my head. Not in a bad way, but my head hurts reading it because there's so much to process and comprehend for me. I mean, at the same time, it's just a stupid little story. Like, it's not like some world-breaking, like, it's not like I'm a college freshman and my whole perspective on the world has changed. It's not like that. It's just the way it can just gut punch you out of nowhere at random times. Was so fun. It's one of the first times I actually laughed out loud reading character dialogue. I don't usually laugh out loud when I'm reading. I've laughed out loud a couple times, put my book down, and just smiled to myself. It's very enjoyable. Terry Pratchett is someone I will definitely read again. I'm going to pick up the next Mort book. But I'm going to need to intersperse it with more traditional stories because I had a hard time marathoning this. Like, if this were a regular story, I could have read it in 2 days. Instead, it took me like 10 days. Which sounds ridiculous. I'll have to go back. Might be 2 weeks, but it's short. It should have taken me less time. But anyways, I pulled out a few quotes that I just sort of wanted to read. These weren't the best quotes. There was so much that I wanted to take note of, but it just required too much backstory. So just to refresh myself on why I love this book, there's just so many different things. To start with, the character of Death itself, the way he speaks in all caps. I love this character. It's very similar to Castiel in Supernatural, where there are aspects of Death trying to interact with the human world, but because he is not a human, he does not understand it. There's a passage about him trying to understand fun, where he's talking to like a bartender, trying to figure out what fun is and why people like getting drunk, like what is fun all about. How is fun manifest? That's what he says in the middle of his conversation, not at the start. How is this fun manifest? Like, it's just, Death had like this 30-page sequence where he was figuring out how humans lived, and it was great, and I loved it. But just a couple quick hits. So one of my favorites was this little chunk on his observations on history. Just coming in out of nowhere, almost out of context, but it works. So this is where Mort has not killed someone, and now history is trying to like rewrite itself. It goes like history. Basically, the context is history is chaotic, thought Mort, and then it says history isn't like that. History unravels gently, like an old sweater. It has been patched and darned many times, reknitted to suit different people, shoved in a box under the sink of censorship to be cut up for the dusters of propaganda. Yet it always, eventually, manages to spring back into its old familiar shape. History has a habit of changing the people who think they are changing it. Like, that just is a little, he's like, I'm going to make a commentary about history and the way it's malleable, but in the end is actually factual. And in one paragraph, 3 sentences, just knocks out of the park. I thought it was just, it's so good. I love it. Before that, there's this whole scene of this old woman, this old witch who's dying, and she is at peace with dying. And she thinks she knows the facts of the world and is confident in the fact she doesn't know. And Mort actually knows more than she does in terms of what death is, but he's like, I don't need to correct her. Like, I'm just going to leave her be. But it's a really beautiful scene about different perspectives of death and how they're all okay. And so if you make peace with it, that's what matters. And there's a little bit about religion dispersed in there. We give death trouble, you see. Or witches give death trouble, you see. Priests don't. So he likes priests. He never said that, said Mort. They're always telling folk how much better it's going to be when they're dead. We tell them it could be pretty good right here, if only they'd put their minds to it. Kind of a fuck you to religion, kind of a, hey guys, stop thinking about death and the afterlife. Make good of what you're alive with right now. That's what I took out of that little passage, and just very good. Very, very good. Little sentence here on resolution. Resolution was good for the moral fiber. The only trouble was the fiber didn't appreciate the sacrifices he was making for it. It's just like, it's so true, man. Like, resolution is good for your moral fiber, but your moral fiber is like, you have to make a lot of sacrifices to get there, and it doesn't really care. You have like this justice boner inside you. Very good. A lot of these like depressive quips in the book, because Mort is kind of like a depressing character. It's not a depressing book, but it verbalizes a lot of these feelings of like sadness and like little snippets of life. And this one I thought was particularly good. There should be a word for that brief period just after waking, when the mind is full of warm pink nothing. You lie there entirely empty of thought, except for a growing suspicion that heading towards you, like a sock full of damp sand in a nocturnal alleyway, are all the recollections you'd really rather do without, and which amount to the fact that the only mitigating factor in your horrible future is the certainty that it will be quite short. Like, it's so absurd and so depressing and yet so relatable. I mean, not everybody has depression, but everybody can relate to that feeling of the morning wakefulness where you're like, so good. So good. I love it. I wish I had more to say on it, but again, these are just snippets. Little snippet here. Would eternity feel like a long time, or all lies from a personal viewpoint entirely the same length? Oh, bro. Oh, what does it mean to be? Ooh, pass it. I like it. And then just the book ends perfectly. Mort is saying goodbye to death. He says, goodbye. It's such an unpleasant word, isn't it? And death, I prefer au revoir. And the context that death knows French, death knows that Mort means death in French. It's ambiguous. Is it destiny that, like the whole book, you don't know why death chose Mort. And it just seems like a silly pun that his name is Mort. But no, death knows French, and Mort's name is Death. come on. I mean, it doesn't mean anything. It's just the end of the book. It's a silly little one-liner that makes you smile and tickles you, and that's how I felt about the whole book. There are profound moments. That's all mess and silliness. It's exquisite satire. Satire that it was... Like, everybody needs to read Terry Pratchett if they want to understand absurdist satire. It's just... I was blown away by Terry Pratchett. I'm glad to have read him. That's Mort.